let's start. I'm going to give you each introductions, right? Tell people who you are if they don't know already, right? And also make the either the positive or the negative case for Joe Biden. We're going to start with you, Noah. Why should we vote for Joe Biden? Go ahead.
Well, besides the fact that I don't like Trump, which is, that's a whole nother thing, let's try to make a positive case for Joe Biden. All my life, I have been hearing people, presidents, legislators say they're going to revive American manufacturing. They're gonna jumpstart American manufacturing, bring it back, reshore, and Trump included. None of them ever did a damn thing, including Trump. Trump did some little tariffs. They did nothing. Not entirely nothing, but nothing to reshore American manufacturing. He yelled at a couple companies to like bring manufacturing back, whatever. He talked a big game, and that was important. It was important to talk a big game to sort of kick people out of the whole free trade orthodoxy that had been, strangling our minds like an octopus for decades. But he didn't. He bashed the old orthodoxy into the ground, but he didn't really put anything in its place. And all these people have been saying it. Obama said he was going to do this. George W. Bush said he was going to do this. None of them ever did it. Biden did it. Unbelievable. If you look at factory construction spending, adjusted for cost, right? This is not like a dollars inflation bullshit, whatever, nominal. I'm talking about real construction spending, adjusted for the cost of actual factory construction. It's like a hockey stick. It's like this giant surge of factory construction. And we can actually, count the factories being constructed and, all the stuff. There's a lot. And it's in exactly the stuff that Biden, and Congress, right, wanted factories to be constructed. Chips and cars and batteries and things like this. Amazing. He did something. Someone did something. Oh my God. Can I curse on the stream? Is it?
You fucking
oh
can't
my fucking God. He did it. He actually did it. And to me, that, I have other reasons to vote for Biden, but that is the reason to vote for Biden above all other things, is that everyone else talked about reviving American manufacturing, and Biden did something. Now, will this lead to like a durable renaissance of manufacturing industry in America? It's too early to tell. There's nothing that would tell us that within 3 years, 2 years, right? There's nothing on earth that could tell us that, but it's going really great so far. And even some of the cases, like, at first TSMC had problems with unions, but now those got solved. And that first TMC is like, oh, actually, we're going to delay it. And then suddenly they're back on schedule. So things are going all right. In terms of this manufacturing revival, we're seeing throughout the Rust Belt and parts of the South, we're seeing battery factories sort of mushroom up. My home state of Texas is host to a lot of factories, and Texas makes it really easy to build stuff. California, no factories, right? They don't make it easy to build stuff. Texas, they absolutely do. Alabama, Ohio, Michigan, places like this, Indiana, Arizona, there's factories going up. And so this is like, to me, this is what Biden did that was different. He did something different, right? And we haven't seen something different.
Hello?
Froze up on me.
Is that me?
Then, huh?
Oh, you froze up for a minute.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Biden did something different.
We haven't seen something different and that's where you froze.
Since Reagan. We haven't seen something different since Reagan, since I was a baby. And I said that tells you how old I was. And so that's incredible. And so Biden deserves credit for that. Massive credit. And I think it's helping the economy. The factory spending is helping the economy. People have jobs, wages going up. That's good. But I think that the true benefits have yet to be seen. The true benefits in a revitalization of American manufacturing, which, by the way, we need American manufacturing, not just to give people jobs. I love giving people jobs. That's great, right? Awesome. However, we are in real danger of losing the Cold War to China, of basically getting beat by China, because they have immense manufacturing capacity. And we've got to do something about that. And Biden is doing something about that. I don't know if it'll be enough. It'll have to be a lot to match what China's doing. I don't know if it'll be enough, but we couldn't just keep going the way we were and not doing anything. We couldn't, keep going the way we were and have any chance of standing up to China in a war Now, maybe if we can sustain momentum for these Biden policies, we can have a fighting chance against China in that potential war, which would be a big war. But which I'm kind of worried about. And I'm worried about war, but most of all, I'm worried about losing the war. And so I'm a fan for that reason. I think there's other good things about Biden. We could talk about other things, but if that's enough, if just stating that one basic central case about manufacturing is enough, then we can go on. I don't want to monopolize the stream.
Oh, it's a good start, and we'll get into it. We'll get, like I said, we'll get into the foreign policy. We'll get into all that.
We'll talk about all that stuff in a bit.
Good start. Well, and also before I forget, because I almost did, just to let everyone know, so it's totally unclear, I do get cut a check from Progressive Victory. So just so everyone knows, full disclosure, right? They're not paying me for any of this content, right? Or anyone being here. No one's getting paid. But I just so people are aware. Rob,
hey, Wick, I thought you were a conservative.
Why did you think I was a conservative?
I guess because when there's no one else to argue with Brianna, you just argue with her a lot.
Yeah, I mean, like I have substantive disagreements with Brianna Wu. Fair enough.
All right. Anyway.
Yeah. Rob,
the more you know. We don't even know your real name. You're a man of mystery. You wear a raincoat. We don't even know who you are. You're in this mysterious raincoat.
It's a wizard's robe. A raincoat? What? This is a wizard outfit.
If I was you, I'd delay my opening to reference Wick's great wardrobe. So originally the topic was given to me was Biden's presidency, whether or not it's been a success. It doesn't matter. It's all the same. Biden vis-a-vis Trump, whatever. On the point of whether or not Biden's presidency was a success, I think what you'll see throughout this debate is basically the Biden administration stance, which is don't believe your lying eyes. They're going to tell you the border's secure. They're going to tell you the economy's humming along. They're going to tell you that they've had massive foreign policy victories. And yet everyone who's remotely looking at this objectively can see that these things aren't true, that that's not the case. That people in this country are suffering, that they realize that they are not the priority of the Biden administration, or for that matter, even establishment people in the Republican and Democratic Party, and that life is getting worse in a litany of ways and getting more dangerous. And so that's the case I'll be making today. There's three areas that we could focus on primarily. The first would be foreign policy. Now, a lot of this, I will be fair, I enjoy debating people that are strongly opinionated and researched on something. So I will use a lot of the arguments that Noah made in his piece that he wrote. Foreign policy, for example, he talks about how the Afghan withdrawal was something that was good. Anyone who follows me knows that I supported withdrawing from Afghanistan. I think that was the right maneuver. However, the way in which it occurred was a disaster, unmitigatedly so, and I hope we get to talk about it. So it shocked me that Noah said that he thought that pullout was done pretty effectively with only 13 American soldiers dying. It was actually a way worse thing than that. So hopefully we'll talk about that. We also see just today, we see that we're pulling out of Niger and giving our base basically to Russia. We can see that there's increased Chinese aggression. We see that we had historic peace deals in the Middle East under Trump, and now we see historic fighting that we haven't seen for years and years. And it seems as if we're on the cusp of World War III, all the while Biden's policies seem to exacerbate the situation.
I have to go get a thing. Hold on.
You want me to wait so he can hear me?
I don't know what he's getting. Like, is he getting a drink? I'm not sure. I don't know. But we're here.
Is he getting someone to help him?
I don't know. Maybe a bunny. He has a bunny. It's a cute bunny.
I was on a flow there too.
Yeah, you were doing great.
Shows up late, interrupts my flow.
I don't look. I'm just putting you in the room, okay? I disavow.
I'm sorry. Someone was banging on my door and shouting at me through the door.
Biden's team. We're paying you to win this debate. Come on.
Do you have information about Boeing's inspection team? Right.
Don't bring it up.
Okay, fine.
It's like Voldemort. You can't name it. Yeah. So
Boeing is great. Greatest company in the world. Their airplanes all work very well. No defects. Definitely no problems at Boeing.
I second that. All right. Finishing real quick on foreign policy and then Ukraine. It's been a disastrous situation. We'll be told that the buck stops with everyone but Joe. He's just a hapless victim that's done his best in all this, and he's not responsible for any of this. But anyone could see that the situation foreign policy-wise was much better prior to Joe Biden than it is now. Then we get to domestic policy. I'll isolate three things. The economy. We will talk about the CHIPS Act and manufacturing. I think it's actually one of Noah's strongest points. And I'm going to tell you right now, I'll straight up tell you, I'm not an economist. I don't have a PhD. I am a redneck who works home health care in rural America. However, I understand somewhat of the economy and can see what's going on around me. And I understand that people are able to manipulate statistics to make things seem as if they're not. And so just like with the border crisis, and we were told over and over that it wasn't a crisis, it wasn't a problem, anyone who could just look at the border could see that that wasn't true. The same is true of the economy. Anyone who buys groceries, that pays rent, that has tried to purchase a house recently knows the sad shape of the economy. And so we'll get into those numbers and to why the economy is a very bad point for what Joe Biden's done. Immigration, as I've already mentioned. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention crime, because it's something that Noah brought up in his piece. So I hope to make the case that crime is actually worse under Biden, at least in ways that affect people in their everyday life, and that is worrying people that traditionally didn't have to worry about these types of crimes. The last thing is sort of general, and I will put in this general category because Wick did mention it, and that was the third category. So I'll put in it, one, the competency of Joe Biden. Joe Biden has dementia. Joe Biden is so out of it that it's not him, it's his handlers that are running things. So much to the point where he was let off the hook for mishandling classified documents because he has dementia, according to special counsel Robert Hur, basically. And now they're unwilling to release those tapes because they know if the American people hears what Joe Biden's really like behind closed door, they will not vote for him, because it is sad how incompetent he is. I do actually feel bad for him as an older gentleman that's suffering from this. He should be spending time with his kids and his grandkids, but unfortunately he doesn't even accept his grandkids as long as Hunter has some sexual tryst that it doesn't benefit him politically. There's also the ideas of corruption. We can see that he's targeting people, like his administration is targeting parents at school boards that he don't like, targeting people that he doesn't like online for mass censorship, targeting his political opponents such as Trump and a bunch of lawyers that are going after him. I know that we'll say, no, it's not just him, it's the DOJ, it's operating independently, but we'll get into how that's not the case. So for all of these cases, I can't think of one metric as to which the Biden presidency has been good for this country. So to answer the question, has it been good? No. We are worse off now than we were previous to Biden presidency. People are struggling mightily in the areas that I've outlined before. And to answer whether or not we should prefer him or Donald Trump, although there are a lot of things that we could criticize Trump for, and I'm sure we'll get to some of those, especially on the economic side that we'll get to in this debate. I'm sure there'll be agreements between Noah and I think that he is unquestionably preferable. To me, the biggest issue is corruption. The fact that we have institutions that put their thumb on the scales of our democracy, such as the FBI, that since the time that Trump came down that escalator have been going at him lock, stock, in collaboration with the Democrats and with establishment politicians, is the biggest threat to our country. Noah and me could have a passionate case about whether the CHIPS Act's good, whether manufacturing and free trade needs to increase, etc. But if our votes don't matter because they're intel agencies, academia, mainstream media, etc., that are collaborating to put their thumb on the scale, then it won't matter who comes out in those debates. So the best chance we have of getting a government in both parties that actually represent the actual people in this country is to out this corruption. And the best way to start doing that is to vote for someone who is at least a potential outsider who's been attacked by these very institutions, which would be Donald Trump.
Okay, and with that, it's open. You guys can discuss, and a lot's been said on both sides. Go ahead.
We could, if you want to start. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I just decided to start with something, simple, like a one point, because whenever there's like this laundry list of points, I feel like, oh my God, like there's just, it's just so many talking points. I feel like the sort of partisan, anti-Biden shouters and the partisan anti-Trump shouters, assemble this list of talking points. Like Hunter Biden, who gives a fuck? I don't give a fuck about Hunter fucking Biden.
Well, I know you don't.
But it's always on the list. It's got to be on the list. It's got to be, because you got to name everything. Benghazi. What the fuck was Benghazi?
I didn't say that.
I don't know what that was. I know, no one said Benghazi. But my point is that that was the list of another year. Okay, the last time they made the standard list. There's a standard list of talking points, and I can rebut the individual talking points. Of course, crime is down.
And you want to start?
Of course, crime is down.
You want to start with crime? We can.
Yeah, let's start with crime.
Okay.
But the point is that there's just it feels like a dump. It feels like a data dump. Like you write a bullet point list and then just dump it out. And I can't do that kind of debate. I have to debate point by point like this. Like I can't skip from Hunter Biden to Afghanistan to this. I'm gonna have to debate point by point, is what I'm saying.
Okay, so
let's start with
we'll do point by point. But we'll start with crime, that's fine. But if I could rebut what you're saying here, have you ever written a book?
Well, I'm writing one now. Yeah.
And in the book, do you have things like an abstract, an overview, things like that explain what the book's about?
Well, no, you do that in a scientific paper. You'll have a thing that say in section 1,
Sure,
I
a
do this.
paper.
In section 2, I do
Books
this.
do the same
Problem
thing.
is that you can't. No, you don't do it with a book, but you do it with a paper. But the point is that when you have that, you can go reference that back. Whereas when you talk, it just sort of runs by in the stream, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, now this is gone. Now we're on to the next.
Well, the point is, when someone asks you to give an opening statement, it is in effect an overview, and you're going to outline briefly all of the reasons you have for endorsing the position you do, which is what I did. I'm more than happy to go point by point on any through. You chose to just.
I don't
focus
care
on one
about
issue.
opening.
Right. So you want to talk about crime? We can.
I have more. I don't just have. I'm just telling the audience. I don't just have one single point to make, even though I made one main point in my opening statement. I'm saying that's just how I think about things. But I'm happy to go through a laundry list of points. I'm happy to address every single point from that list if I can remember them, which I can't. I can remember like 5 out of the 28. But like
3
let's go back.
categories: foreign policy, domestic, and sort of ideas of corruption. You want to do domestic?
I'm just explaining why my statement was different.
Fine.
But okay. All right. Here's the
We're
thing.
good. Let's start with crime. Since you guys both want to
start
start
with
with crime, let's go crime. Okay,
Here's
you
my
said
thoughts
it's
about
down.
crime.
Go ahead.
Crime is way down, but here's why I think that. I've looked at crime statistics, and I know that crime reporting it can change a lot. How many crimes people report to the cops changes dramatically from time to time. And sometimes when crime goes up, it can induce people to report less because they're just like, there's so much crime. It's not even worth calling the police for this particular crime. So sometimes when crime actually goes up, it can look like it went down in the data. And I understand that. And vice versa, right? So that you can go that reported crime. So when people say total violent crimes, I look at those and I see most of that's assault. And I say, okay, well, someone punched someone in a bar. Who the fuck cares? Like in a low crime area in Japan, someone gets punched in a bar, you call the cops. In, Austin, Texas, maybe you wouldn't because that's just Texas. In like Baltimore, no one will call the cops for like someone getting punched in a bar. So the point is, I understand that reporting statistics, can change dramatically, which is why I always look at murder specifically, because when there's a dead body, it never gets covered up unless you're the mafia and you can drown the body in a pit of acid. But the dead body will be there, and someone's going to call the cops, and the cops are going to record it as a homicide, right? Once in a while, they'll misclassify a thing. They'll say, oh, this was a suicide, or, like natural causes. Occasionally they will. But murder statistics are really good because they all get reported. And so I look at murder, and there's a number of sources of murder. So there's cities that report to the FBI. Sometimes they report, sometimes they don't. The ones that report, you can tell. There's victimization surveys where you say, do you know anyone who's been murdered? There's other things where there's people who actually go and call every police department and say, how many homicides did you record this year? Right? And they know, and they get very good coverage. They get pretty much any police department in the entire nation will tell you their number of homicides for the year. And the people who do this, and there's several people who do this, several agencies, like the Wall Street Journal does this, a bunch of people do it. Most of these are fairly conservative outfits too, who do this. They get good numbers. They get pretty much every city in America to report, murders. That doesn't always give you any total number of murders in the United States, because there's murders in rural areas that don't get counted. But it'll give you murders in like every city larger than 50,000 people or something like that. And that's good enough. That's good. That's good data. And so when I look at that, I saw that murder went up hugely in 2020. Huge spike. And then in 2021, the first year of Biden, it went up a little bit more on top of 2020. So it was getting worse. And in 2020, I was like, oh my God, crime is still getting worse because of that. And you can look, and I wrote that. But starting in 2022, continuing in 2023, and now apparently, although it's preliminary, continuing again in 2024, murder rates have fallen off a cliff and are basically back down to where they were before COVID, before the big spike that happened in 2020 under Trump. And so, did Biden do this? I don't know. I have theories. I know Biden supported a lot more cops. Biden was never a defund the police guy. He had the Safer America plan, which advocated putting 100,000 more cops on the streets throughout America. We know that cops in general reduce crime. And so how much did Biden really have to do with that? I don't know. But it happened. And it blows my mind that when people say, like, oh, it didn't really happen, because, like, you don't get better crime statistics than these murder numbers.
All right. So if I could jump in here. So there's a couple things to
Okay.
say. First off, I think that it's erroneous to just look at homicide numbers when you're talking about people that are speaking about being concerned about crime. And I assume that's why you wrote this bit in the piece. The problem is there are people that are worried about crimes that traditionally didn't have to worry about these types of crimes. Now, it might be a problem with sort of demographically in our country that needs a bigger, broader discussion, but there are communities that traditionally haven't suffered the sort of things like break-ins, carjackings, home burglaries, etc., that now seem to be experiencing those regularly. There's also sort of more... What's that?
Can you be more specific? Yeah, I'm interested in that. Can you be more specific?
Right. So, like, we're seeing areas, more affluent areas in places like Los Angeles and other places like DC, neighborhoods that traditionally, for example, we now see a fear of people that work on Capitol Hill that said, traditionally, I didn't have to worry about walking home from work before, but now I feel like I'm more likely to be a victim of random crime. And we can see crimes like carjackings, property crimes, things like that. And this is important because it has to do with the sort of ideological difference between what the Democratic Party and what the Biden administration is representing, which, regardless if Biden wants to bite this bullet or not, you could say, well, he was pro-police. It is from his party, which he is beholden to, that we see all these Democrat DAs that are doing things like bail reform that are putting people back out on the streets. And so it's not just a matter of homicides or even these crimes. It's the fact that people are seeing that there's almost immunity for many low-level criminals and even violent criminals at this point, and it seems to be more random. The second point, to talk about the homicide stats specifically, if we're just looking at the homicide stats, there is no question that unless there's an incredible dip-off in this year, that the totality of homicides under Joe Biden will quite easily surpass the totality of homicides under Donald Trump. It is true that they have trajected downward slightly, but they are still not at the levels they were at 2019. So, for example, if you look at the 2023 numbers, they're still considerably higher than the 2019, and it looks as if if the trend continues, it'll still finish above or around the 2019 number at this time. So taking those 4 years in whole, we could see that actually that shows that there was actually still more homicides under Joe Biden. So that doesn't seem to be a positive to vote for him. The last thing I'll say on this particular point is the idea that we should just use homicide stats because they wouldn't be able to be as easy to sort of game isn't necessarily true. So I found this article from Real Clear Investigations. It says, well, FBI stats show declines in violent categories. The Department of Justice surveys, that's the Violent Crime Victimization Survey, reports more people saying they've been the victims of such crimes. The Center for Disease Control figures for homicide, which have long moved in the same direction as the FBI's, started exceeding the FBI's in 2020, and the gap has widened since then. Quote, I wouldn't say the FBI is cooking the books, but that data they are pulling out is half-baked. In other words, when you look at the crime victimization surveys, which the most recent data we have, I believe, is 2022, you can see that actually it's starting to bifurcate, and there's far more people reporting they were known victims of homicides than the actual homicides that are being reported. And
Rob, I already talked about exactly this. Didn't you hear me give this little each?
No, I didn't. I heard you say that you said that it's people that know victims of homicide.
No, I talked about the different data sources that we have.
Right, but the point...
I talked about the FBI underreporting thing that you came prepared to talk about.
What I'm saying is you didn't
right
address
bat,
no, you didn't.
No.
You didn't address this specific point, and the specific point is this: you made it seem like
I already addressed it. I did.
You did not. You could insist you did.
I'll
finish my point.
I absolutely did.
I'll finish my point.
I addressed it. I did. I already did.
Okay.
I'll tell you exactly.
Clever debate tactic, but
hold on. And
I'll tell you again. I can repeat it again because I know that it can
both of you, please, for a moment, just so we get a little order in this court. We are going to let Rob finish, but then I want you to address it again, right? And just to give you all the space without interruption to do it again. Rob, finish your point, and then we'll go to Noah.
Seemed to me his point was, although those victimization surveys could be outliers from the actual FBI and other crime statistics, homicide was a better metric to use because if there's a dead body, there's a dead body. What I'm saying is the crime victimization survey shows that there are a lot of dead bodies that possibly aren't showing up on those official homicide statistics.
Okay, Noah, what you got?
Well, okay, so yes, there's some cities that aren't reporting to the FBI, as I said. But there's other data besides victimization surveys and FBI reporting. Victimization surveys take a long time, which is why we don't have them for the last 2 years. However, What we do have are a bunch of people who will call up individual police departments, including those who don't report to the FBI, and say, how many homicides do you have last year? And that police departments tell them. And so, for example, the Wall Street Journal recently did this. You know, the Wall Street Journal had this story about crime. Let's see if I can find it. Homicides are plummeting in American cities. And the data here, right, is collected by a crime data analyst, Jeff Asher, who's he's a pro-police guy. You know, he's not like a MAGA guy necessarily, but he's a conservative guy who wants more cops. And so his research organization, they just call all the police departments up and they say, hey, how many homicides do you have? Now, police departments could lie, right? Police departments could lie. Maybe. But they can check the ones who do report against the FBI numbers. They can make sure, you know, we'll never know. Maybe there's a big police conspiracy across America to hide a bunch of bodies, but it's the best data we have. And when you call up all those police departments, you don't have the problem of cities that don't report to the FBI, because if they don't report to the FBI, you still call them up and say, hi, I'm on the phone, and they get great coverage. So if you look at a list of cities, you can see the whole list of cities. You can check they're all there. And Jeff Asher isn't the only one who does this either. There's a couple other groups who do this too, and they find this. They all get the same numbers. They all get the same thing. So that's the data that I'm going on, because it doesn't take, you know, it's not 2 years stale, at least 2.5 years stale, like the victimization survey, which I do look at, which is important. And also, it is, you know, it doesn't depend on which cities choose to report to the FBI. So that's the data I was talking about.
Okay,
anyway.
just so to respond to this, I still think the victimization survey is going to be preferable, because there's all sorts of things that could be lost in the actual record keeping when it comes to law enforcement and the various mechanisms that they would report through. So we could see that there's already, all I'm saying is to take the numbers as gospel that, oh, homicides are on the way down, which doesn't address the fact that in totality, homicides are up overall under Joe Biden than they were under Trump. And it doesn't affect the fact of all the other crimes that I was talking about. But just focusing on those numbers, I talked about the discrepancy that you could see from the victimization. I don't see a reason to not prefer the victimization, other than your very real argument that the victimization survey is always a few years behind. But that's because they're taking their time with it, and it takes time for these people to come in. But you're right, if we're trying to look for data for 2024, the victimization survey is not going to help. So we'll have to see in a couple years what those numbers show. However, the idea that there's people checking in on sort of, you know, calling and checking in. Again, this same article, let's go with a couple things it says. In Baltimore, the police department and various news reports put the total of homicides of 2022 between 332 and 336, but the FBI data set puts the number at 272. Baltimore police officials did not reply to our inquiries about the widespread reported numbers, and if anyone in the city's department had brought it to the FBI. Similarly, police departments in Milwaukee and Nashville did not respond to questions about divergencies between their stats on robberies. Milwaukee police reported a 7% increase in robberies, but the FBI reported a 13% decline. Now, if it's true that there are diligent people that are calling and making sure these numbers are on the up and up, then it would seem that these discrepancies would be rare. But it seems that they occur quite frequently.
Let's take the higher numbers then.
Why?
Because that's more favorable to your argument. So if even the higher numbers are way, way, way down, then that means I'm right.
But that's not, but how would we know that? These are higher numbers that are talking about a discrepancy from the data set that we have that's complete in 2022. And so even if you could say, well, if we just take the higher numbers in these instances, the point that I'm showing to make by those discrepancies is that these aren't complete numbers. And so just because we caught it twice, do you believe these are the only two police departments that occurred in?
No, I think what you're talking about occurs everywhere for non-homicide crimes.
Well, specifically, it mentioned
many crimes,
homicide in Baltimore.
if you use victimization numbers, then you're going to get people who didn't call the cops and the cops never heard about it. And that happens. That's incredibly well known. It was the first thing I talked about, and it's why I use homicide to begin with. For victimization surveys for homicide, you can't call up a dead guy and say, did you get
Oh, you're cutting out. Is this me?
You can't do that. So homicide victimization, I don't know. I think it's me. It's probably me. I don't know why I'm getting this booping noise.
You're good now. Sorry,
Okay.
it's just yeah.
Sorry. I apologize for the booping.
It's not your fault. Clearly, it's all right.
All right. So no, it is my fault for not knowing how to use Discord. But anyway, because I'm old, but I'm still wearing a hat with a rabbit dumpling thing, drinking boba, even though I'm old. All right. So I guess my point is, victimization surveys for homicide are really easy because you got to get the name of the victim. Right? Because if you call up 10 people who all knew the same guy who died, you're not going to count 10 homicides. So you got to make sure they're not overlapped. So you can't double count. So if you have victimization surveys for murder, it's really hard because you have to check the names of the people. That's really hard. Victimization surveys for assault, you can say, were you assaulted? A lot easier. We know there's a discrepancy. There's always a discrepancy because a lot of crimes don't get the cops called, but homicides do. Homicides, cops always get called because no one can hide a stinky, decaying, horrible dead body. And so the cops always get called for a dead body.
That's not entirely true, but again, just to wrap up this point, because I think we will have a lot to get to.
I'm sure someone throws a body in the river, but almost nobody. Look, I did social science, right? I worked with data, and you'll never get a perfect data source in the world. You'll never know exactly the right number of anything in the world, but calling up police departments and saying, hey, police, how many homicides did you have this year? And calling up every single police department, and then we have multiple different sets of people doing this. That's as good data as we can get. I'm not going to disbelieve the best data we can get just because it doesn't agree with the story I want to tell about the Biden administration.
Yeah, just a question for each of you, if I may. And so I guess I'll start with Noah. So you mentioned that these things are trending downwards. But to Rob's point, are they going to be below the norm, I guess the normative point for Trump's presidency, 2016 to 2020? Like, are they going to still remain higher?
It's a good question. So, according to preliminary data that we have, like the Wall Street Journal article, for example, it looks like homicides are back down to the rates they were at in 2019, before the pandemic. That's not the lowest we've ever had. The lowest we ever had was 2014, right? That was the lowest. But it's about as low as, say, the 1950s. Okay, back when you had those nice paintings that everybody likes to look at from the 1950s. Our murder rate now is about the same as the 1950s. Now, it was a lot higher 3 years ago. The thing is, it's gone down a lot. Now, you can ask, okay, so the total number of murders is higher under Biden than Trump, because in Trump, the murder spike happened under Trump. Almost 100% of the murder spike happened under Trump in 2020, but it happened in the last year of his presidency. So while murders were slightly elevated in 2016, 2017, or 16 was Obama, but 17, 18, slightly elevated, but not really that high. And then they went super high in 2020. So you had less area under the curve, right? If you had the integral from calculus, you'd have less total murders because it spiked in the last year of Trump's presidency. The problem with this is that murder rates have momentum. So if you have high murder rates, you never see it drop back down in 1 year. We've never seen that in the history of history. Murder rates that are high take years to go back down. It has to go slowly down. We don't know why. Our best guess is that murders cause people to do more murders. But we don't really know. And you can read a whole bunch of criminology papers about this, but we don't really know why murders have this sort of momentum to them. But you had this giant spike in 2020. Then you had a much smaller increase in 2021 to the peak. So 2021 was the peak year under Biden. Then you start to see the giant drop off. And that's good. We can't, even in the 90s, right? Like, I was a kid in the 90s. Now you know how old I am. I was a kid in the 90s, and I saw this giant drop happen from the super high crime rates of like 93, right? That was like the peak, was 93. Then it really fell off a cliff. But it still took 6 years for it to get down all the way, from that level. So it takes time to get down. And the fact that it's been plummeting under Biden, while in general it rose under Trump, to me, that direction of change is the important thing. And if you want to say, oh no, actually there's more total murders, I'm just like, okay, who did murder spike under? When did the murder spike happen? It happened when Donald Trump was president. And I can't tell you that Donald Trump caused the murder spike, because I know the president doesn't have psychic powers and make everyone go out and murder. I'm not going to say that. Or does he? No, I mean, I think there is a chance that social unrest, caused this, and that people getting upset, over social stuff, protests and riots and things like that, which was not unrelated to Trump, I will say. I think that was probably the big cause of the murder spike.
Okay. I want to give
I
Rob.
Be nice to get in here. Been about 15 minutes.
Yeah,
Okay.
I want to give Rob a chance to respond to that, and then I have a question for Rob.
Okay, yeah, the totality of murders is higher under Biden than Trump. You can spin about directionality and all that stuff, but that's just the truth. A lot of the murders, the reason for it, my best guess would be, and granted, I don't have proof of this, has to do a lot with social factors, demonizing the police, etc. And despite the fact that my opponent will say, well, Joe Biden's always been pro-police, it is his party that was anti-police. It was Kamala Harris that was doing things like promoting a bail fund for people after they were burning down a courthouse. It was Democrats that turned a blind eye to all of the violence that was occurring. It was Democratic governors and mayors that insisted that the National Guard not be put in, the police not be put in to solve all of the unrest and violence. And even though that might not directly have led to homicides, though it did, I think there were some 40 people that were killed during the Summer of Love, that certainly set the tone for what was going around the country. And so certainly you can't blame Trump for policies and philosophy of Democrats that encourage this hatred of the police, which led to this spike in stuff, particularly then when we see in totality there was more of these homicides that happened under Biden. And even though it's dropping now, don't be like, when you look, it actually dropped from Obama's first year to Trump's first year as well. So it was on the decline until this sort of stuff started to occur anyways, which Democrats were facilitating nefariously for political reasons. Also, I just want to be quick. This is the only argument he has on crime. I'm trying to make the point that the reason crime is a political issue doesn't really have to do with the homicide numbers per se. It has more to do with the facts I was saying, that people don't feel safe in neighborhoods that they traditionally do. We could see that arrest rates and closure rates of cases are remarkably down, almost 10% down in cities over 1 million people since when Trump was in office. And you can see that there's all these gaslighting that things are really good. Meanwhile, we see places like New York that are deploying the National Guard in subways because things are getting so bad there. Yet all the while we're told by the data analysts, no, trust us. Crime's going down. Don't believe your lying eyes.
Let's move on.
I want to talk about policy. We can talk about stats all day, right? But I want to talk about the policies that Trump has either embraced or discarded that might be leading to some things. So let's.
You mean Biden?
When we talk about policy, let's talk about the border. Okay.
Let's do it.
Recently, Biden has tried to pass an immigration bill that had funding for the border. It was rejected by Republicans. Trump killed the bill, if you will. A lot of Republicans said for good reason. It wasn't enough, right? So I would just want to talk about Biden's policies on the border. I'm going to give it to Rob first this time, right? How do you think Biden has been on the border? Where has he succeeded? Where has he failed? And what policies, and I want to stick on the policies, right, has he either ignored or pushed forward that has either exacerbated the problem or helped solve it? Go ahead, Rob.
So we'll talk about policies, but more important than policies is the signaling that he sent that caused the problem in the first place. But let's talk about policies. When he comes in office, he rescinds, 90-something executive orders, including Remain in Mexico. We could see that the numbers under Trump were remarkably lower than Biden. The numbers of people that are coming across the border under Biden, there is no way to spin them. They are historic highs. They continue to be high, even if you have slight gluts, and they didn't care about it. They gaslit the American people, including Biden himself and his secretary Mayorkas, that gaslit people that this wasn't a crisis. Meanwhile, we could see that it's a crisis not just for the people in the communities where these illegals end up, where you see now inner city communities that are saying we can't handle it anymore. We were told it was all fine when it was conservative border cities. It was fine to have all those people there. But send 40 people to Martha's Vineyard for 24 hours and Miyama, have your Fruit Loops and see you later. We can't handle it anymore. You see this occurring in all sorts of city council meetings in traditionally black neighborhoods now, where they feel that they've been suffering from poverty for years and years. Democrats have done nothing to help them, but all of a sudden they're sending fat checks out to illegal immigrants. Biden's administration did nothing and allowed this wave to occur. They thought that it helped them politically. They were happy with the import of cheap labor and the import of people that would ideologically more likely agree with them. So they did nothing about this crisis. And now during an election year, they try to come out and say, oh, actually, it was a problem all along. Wasn't a problem in 2021, wasn't a problem in 2022, wasn't a problem in 2023. But now in 2024, it's a problem, and it's Trump's fault. That's whose fault it is. The bill they put forth is garbage. What it would have done would give all sorts of loopholes. The House bill that was put forth would have done far better, even though it didn't go far enough either. And Biden would be able to issue executive orders or reinstitute those that Trump had that would be able to keep those numbers at Trump's level. But the last and most important thing to remember is this. When the Democratic Party, including Joe Biden, were asked on the debate stage whether or not it should be a criminal offense for people to come illegally, illegal migrants, none raised their hand. When they were asked if they should get benefits, all raised their hand. When they interview people that are crossing the border, why are you here? They say because they think Biden will let them in. They thought Trump would keep them away, and they think Biden will let them in. And that's exactly what's happening. And because of that, there's not just an... What's that?
Who's they? Who's they? You're talking about the people
the
who raised their
Democratic
hand?
Party? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, the illegal immigrants is who I'm talking about.
Was this a focus group?
No, it wasn't a focus group. Let me finish my point, and then you could ask me a question if you want. So,
sorry.
real quick to finish the point. So we could see that it's a humanitarian crisis with people that are being smuggled by coyotes, that are being sexually trafficked. And we now also see that are in this place where World War III or a significant conflict with Iran, China, that which Noah's talked about, fearful of a war with China. We see all sorts of people from those nationalities that are now coming across the border unvetted. It is a disaster that's already occurred, and it's waiting to explode even further. And it's happened solely because of the policies and the position that Joe Biden has set forth.
Okay. What do you think, Noah? Go ahead. Biden's policies on the border. Go ahead.
Right. First, I just want to say, I think people don't understand where this border crisis is coming from, why it's happening. And this is something I found only after reading a hell of a lot about immigration. I was going to write a book about immigration, actually, and I read about 35 books about it. But I didn't find what was causing this border crisis until I just really researched the law. The problem is asylum. So according to this 1967 treaty that we signed, the UN Convention on the Status of Refugees, you can't discriminate against someone on an asylum request if they enter the country illegally. We signed and ratified that. And that was dumb because nobody at the time anticipated this kind of crisis, even though they should have, because they were just dumb. And I don't know, because I wasn't there in 1967. Not that old. So, but the problem is now, at some point starting in the 2010s, but then really continuing recently, more and more, everybody in the world, including, originally Central America, but then the whole world realized that if you can just get across the border and turn yourself into the Border Patrol, you can request asylum, and they have to give you a hearing because we signed that treaty. That's the law. And we passed a law about asylum that says you have to do that. And so that's stupid. And so what we need to do is just reform that law and change that law so that if you cross the border illegally, you're not allowed to apply for asylum. Say, sorry, 1967 UN Convention on the Status of Human Refugees. That was a mistake. We're not going to abide by that. And then, sue us, okay? But, all right, so that's what we need to do. We need to change that law. So far, I have seen only one human being ever mention that law needs to be changed. That happened to be Joe Biden. But not to give Biden too much credit here, he didn't harp on it a lot. He just said, until we change that law, things will never change. He's right. Rob is right that there are a lot of people in the Democratic Party who don't want to do anything about this, who do not see this as a problem at all. And it was deeply ironic when red state governors decided, okay, let's bus some of these people to New York. Let's bus some of these people to Martha's Vineyard. And then there was like, oh my God, we actually have to pay for these people's services. Holy shit. We thought someone else was going to pay, and then they had to pay. And then they were like, okay, this is a crisis. And that's when sentiment really got mad in America about the border crisis. So you're right. You're absolutely right. And many Democrats just thought, oh, we don't need to do anything about this. It's fine. It is not fine. It's a problem. It's and no one recognizes this more than the people on the border. If you go to Texas, where I'm from, and you go down to the border where everybody on the border speaks Spanish, they are the biggest enthusiasts of border security. They want to stop these people from coming over harder than just about anybody. So I'm sympathetic. The border crisis is a crisis. It's because of a shitty law that not enough people care about fixing. Now, Republicans, I have not seen any Republican propose to fix this law. One, not Trump, not Mitch McConnell, not Mike Johnson, not anybody. has proposed to fix this law. And it frustrates me because it's like, and my guess is that they just don't know that the law exists and they've never heard of the 1967 UN Convention on Murder of Her. They've never even heard of it. They don't know what it is. Maybe Mike Johnson knows what it is, but they don't know that this is the root of the problem. So they're not trying to fix it either. So it's a little frustrating. Now, I will say that Biden ignored this problem for too long, and that was a big mistake. He ignored it for years, and only under pressure, only when people started getting really mad about it, did he do anything about it. And the stuff that he started to try to do was very, very similar to the stuff that Trump did, which is to say, break the law. Because Trump issued a bunch of executive orders that were illegal. Unfortunately, they should have been legal, but they were illegal, and courts struck them down because they were in violation of our asylum law, which we signed because we signed the 1967 blah, 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 right? So Trump issued these executive orders. They got struck down. What did Biden do when he finally was forced to acknowledge the problem? He issued the same executive orders Trump did, basically. Slight difference, but basically the same thing. And those will also be struck down by the courts, I promise. All the stuff in the bill that Trump killed, yes, Trump killed it. Yes, he did it because he's a jerk and he didn't want Biden to get a win in the election year. But to be fair, Biden was only doing that in the first place to pander. But the point is that those things in that bill will all get struck down by the courts because the asylum law isn't being changed. And until that asylum law is being changed, so I'm kind of just sitting here going, yeah, it's a big problem. I don't see anybody who actually wants to fix it. And I don't know why. So I'm not going to defend Biden on this, okay? Go ahead. Bash Biden all you want on this.
Sure.
I think it was a big mistake for Biden. But I'm frustrated because I don't think Trump is going to fix it. I think what Trump is going to do is, I don't think he understands the law or why it needs to be fixed or what, I don't think he understands any of that. But even if he did understand, I think it is more politically advantageous to him to keep this crisis going so he can keep yelling and scaring people about it. That's more valuable than actually fixing the border to Trump. And so I'm just frustrated all around. And so I don't know if I'm arguing with you here, but this is my perspective.
So sure, this might be just real quick. This might be a quick topic if you guys are mostly in agreement. But Rob, go ahead.
Okay, so to kind of throw you a bone here a little, I would agree with you that I think when you said there's a lot of Democrats that don't want the problem solved, I agree with you. I think there's a lot of Republicans. I think there are a lot of establishment type Republicans that have no problem with the amount of illegal immigration that comes. And this has been something that before Trump came along, when Trump started talking about the border, if you followed Republican politics, a lot of people in Republican circles were focus group type people were telling Trump, don't talk about immigration. We're telling Republicans, don't talk about it. It's a losing issue. Don't talk about it. And so Trump was the first person that really put a focus in a national spotlight for president on this particular issue. So I agree with you that there are Republicans, I will give you a bone if you say there are Democrats. I think there are Republicans that feel the same way. The question is, we're deciding whether or not the Biden presidency has been effective. And on this question of immigration, it clearly hasn't. It's been a disaster. You point to, well, it's because of these international asylum laws that we signed on to, and they need to be revoked. But I don't disagree. I would have to look at the specific law that you're talking about. Possibly that is something that would help, but certainly there are ways to interpret the revocation. Like we could restrict what asylum means to us, or we could just flat out ignore what the international law was. That might not be the best, but the United States has done it before.
We should.
And we're in a crisis in our country. And so the question I have for you is, if it's purely because there's nothing that could be done because of this law, this international law, why the spike under Biden?
A couple of reasons. Number one, what you said, everyone thought, oh, Biden's nicer on immigration. He's not gonna throw us in the camps or whatever the hell. Reputation, I think, was a big thing. Number two, is the end of the pandemic and America's super strong growth. If you look at our economy, it's doing better than any other economy. It's doing much better than Mexico. It's doing better than Europe. It's doing better than all these places. It's doing, and then there's a lot of, you see people from China now showing up because China's doing incredibly well right now, despite all the cars that they're making and selling. So our economy so part of it was Biden's reputation, I think, but very little of it was actual policy. But I think that because the courts, had already struck down Trump's restrictions, it took Biden a while to put similar things in place. I think it was the main driver was the spread of information about the asylum loophole. Central Americans, people from like El Salvador and whatever, knew about this in 2014. People from Cameroon knew about this in 2021. Everybody knew. Just the diffusion of information about this stupid loophole in our law took time. And also, America's economy was just so great, everyone wanted to come and work. I think the silliest argument about the borders, and people are like, these are military-age men, it's an invasion. No, it's working-age men, because it's just people who want to work. All they want to do is work. They're not refugees. They're not, like, oh, I was so badly treated in my country. No, you weren't. You just want to work. And you know what? Actually, that's fine. But we should have an orderly process for bringing people into work, not a disorderly process where you get rewarded for breaking the law and crossing the border illegally and turning yourself into the Border Patrol. That's silly. That is the current law. So I agree with you. We should just say 1967 convention, blah, 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 goodbye. We're changing our law. We will have to amend our law. We can't just ignore it, because we did make a law that was, when we signed that convention, it said you have to make your own law that says this, right? And we did. We passed a law on asylum, our own domestic law, not some international treaty, that says if you cross illegally, you still get full asylum claim and we can't kick you out and blah, 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 as long as you turn yourself in. We signed that. And it's not just that we signed that, it's that we made that law for ourselves. And so we have to revoke it. We have to cancel it. Only Congress can do that. My worry is that the MAGA people don't want to fix it because they want to have something to scare people about. They want to have something to shout about. Maybe that's paranoid. Maybe they would like to fix it. I'd like to fix it. I would gladly support them if they wanted to change this law. If Trump was president, gets elected, and he said tomorrow, we've got to change this law so you can't get asylum if you cross the border illegally, I'd be like, I support you, Trump. Done.
So I guess,
and I'm just wondering why that never happened.
My area of disagreement would be this. I think what was the House bill that was put forth, HR2, was far more stringent and would have done far more than what the Senate suggested that the Democrats are pushing forth. So I think you should support that bill. So the idea that Republicans in general or MAGA people wouldn't push, I think they would. They're pushing for a stronger bill. And if Senate, and the other thing I would say is just this is anecdotal, and I don't know if you saw this, but I saw Brett Weinstein go to the Darien Gap, which is a big sort of thoroughfare that people are coming through from South America to get in. And he said that there are basically two kinds of migrants that are coming. There are those exactly you hear about that are good people, basically economic migrants, not really refugees, but they're coming for good work. Okay. By the way, those people would have been coming pre-COVID as well. If you're coming from places like Venezuela or Nicaragua, whatever, these countries, there was economic incentive always to come to the United States. So I don't buy that COVID's the reason that so many are mobilized. But he also said that there was another camp of people he saw, and those were particularly Chinese nationals. And he said the feeling was incredibly hostile. They had entire camps set up, and that they were basically instructed not to talk to journalists or not to talk to people that were there, and that he felt there was almost something nefarious about it. So I'm just saying, particularly from your perspective as someone who's worried about an upcoming conflict with China, I think that there are many, many reasons that we could spend hours talking about the problem with how much illegal immigration, economic, socially, culturally, crime, illness and things that could come through. But I think one of the big things that we should be talking about is the potential for this porous border weakening us to enemies that could have terrorist strike or attack our infrastructure in certain ways. And I just think that the Biden administration, it has been an abysmal failure, and there is no sign that going forward a vote for Joe Biden or the Democratic Party in general would do anything to alleviate this. At least the Republicans are paying lip service to saying this. Democrats still are fighting with half of their constituents that think we should have complete open borders. So they can't come out and do anything about it, just like you're seeing with Israel-Palestine, which maybe we'll get to at some point. The Democrat Party split. Half of these young progressives are like, oh no, we have to welcome everyone with open arms. The Statue of Liberty says X. And then half the Democratic Party's like old school, like union people that are like, what are you doing? You're depressing our wages. Like, we can't have any more of these people you're taking away our town buildings to house illegal immigrants, etc. And if we're not careful, we're going to end up like Europe, like the UK, which I just saw a poll on Britain, Good Morning Britain the other day. Good Morning Britain polled their audience if multiculturalism was a success. 95% said no, because the landscape of their entire country is shifting so radically that they don't even recognize their country. And that's what's going to happen if we continue to have presidencies like Joe Biden.
I'll let you respond, then I want to get to the economics section of the debate. But go ahead.
I have one question though before for Rob, if that's okay.
Yeah, it's your chance to respond. So go ahead.
Yeah, Chinese guys coming in. I know a couple people who know a couple of the Chinese guys who snuck in that way.
Okay.
And they were telling me about these. These are my friends are crypto people, and they help sneak the Chinese people in with crypto.
Okay.
By the way, one of the biggest uses of crypto is to get money out of China. And they said, these guys, coming in, they basically don't even consider themselves Chinese anymore. They hate, they're like, such bullshit has gone down. Like, they're like, I'm ethnically Chinese, but I don't want anything to do with, Xi Jinping and this stuff that's going on. When Ronald Reagan was president, we had this thing, and I am not really that old enough to remember. I remember Reagan's last speech. I was like, I think 5, 6. So then I was 5, I guess. So when Ronald Reagan left, he was like, we're the city on a hill, to all these people, escaping these horrible regimes. And I know that China sucks, and it sucks worse than people say. Like it's more sucky on the inside than it looks to us on the outside, or for tourists who just go see like the delivery robots and whatever that they have. Like for regular people, it sucks more. I feel for these people, and I want to be like Reagan told us to be. And I don't care if that makes me a bad Democrat for saying that Reagan was good. But I've said it online, and I got dogpiled online for saying
You're out,
this.
man. You're out now. You just
out.
got kicked out of the club. No, I don't. But
Who cares?
This is the problem.
I'm just a blogger. They don't care.
Look,
But
sorry,
what do we do about these guys? What do we do about the Chinese guys who really want to escape Xi Jinping and the bullshit that's going on there?
Well, we have to accept it is the duty of our government to represent the people of this country and the citizens of this country. And so any immigration system that we have shouldn't be because of moral concerns for other people. We shouldn't actively do no harm. I'm not saying we should go out and steal a country's resources because screw them. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is, as long as there are people that need the services of the government here, we shouldn't be worried about being morally virtuous to people around the world. And so any immigration system, particularly with these group of people that are trying to flee Xi, we would have to accept that the people that we were bringing in, we think would be of net benefit to our country. So we're not doing it as a favor. We're doing it because it would be net beneficial to us. And the problem is, just like when you hear people say things like this, well, 97% of people that are let go return for their immigration hearing. And the problem is, right, but if there were bad people like in ISIS or working for the Chinese government, do you think they'd be in the 97% that returned or the 3% that wouldn't? And so the problem is by allowing this sort of system where we're allowing this flood, basically an open border where anyone who wants to come basically gets to come through. If a country was going to be hostile to us, which is inevitable, countries like Iran, China, North Korea, etc., they are going to exploit this system. And there will inevitably come a time. And then what's terrible is not only will there be some bad event that occurs, but then the very people that have allowed this porous border will then use that event as an excuse to strip more rights from Americans, just like we saw with things like the Patriot Act. So I think that while we're telling Americans you can't go through an airport without getting sniffed like you're an 8-year-old girl by Joe Biden, we at the same time have this open border where we're allowing all of these people to come through. It's just counterintuitive. It once more represents what I think the Biden administration has represented, which is this is an America last presidency. They care less about the citizens of this country and more about, doing things to help people globally or help people around the world.
Any response to that?
Oh, sure. Which is to say, I understand that we have to operate this country for the benefit of us. But I also feel that I benefit from people being in my country who, A, can work and support our country, and B, hate our enemies. And that was what we did during the Cold War. I think we got, all the Cubans who hated Castro came here. And now, that's why Cuba's a red state. So if you like having Republicans get elected,
there was a lot of criminals, though, that Castro unleashed the
a
kid
lot of
across.
criminals.
Well.
I saw Scarface. I saw that.
Eating octopus every day. Yeah.
Eating octopus. Oh, yeah, but okay. Snorting a mountain of cocaine. Say hello to my little friend. Anyway, but the point is that, I know we got criminals, but the point is we got lots of people who improved this country because they wanted to escape the communists. There's nothing wrong with wanting to escape communists. And I wish that modern day conservatives and MAGA people would understand that there's nothing wrong with people who want to get away from the commies. There's nothing wrong with that. And our country is stronger for having those people in it. Their children will be Republican voters. They can't vote themselves, but their children will be. And yeah, I'll
just answer 10 seconds.
I don't stronger. I'm stronger to have those people. I'm not because they're going to do my lawn, because they're not, but because that will strengthen the polity of my country. They're going to join the military. They're going to provide valuable intelligence, by the way.
I'll just answer 10 seconds and then we can move on if you want. I'll just say
no, go ahead.
the problem I'm having, though, is even if you're right that that's 95% of the people, if we have a system that's set up that's so porous that could be taken advantage of by these very countries like China, it eventually will. So even if you're right that 95% of these Chinese immigrants that are coming or illegals that are coming are actually anti-Xi, right? The problem is the 5% that will still be loyal to Xi. And the damage that damage that they would be able to do would far outweigh. So if you want to have the system like the Cuban system, you can't have them flooding in like that occurred. What you want is a proper vetting. Hopefully, if we get to foreign policy, we'll talk about Afghanistan. I have no problem with Afghani translators that helped us in Afghanistan being welcomed into our country. What I have a problem with is we left almost all of them there and mass rushed in people that we didn't vet. That's the problem. And so to say, but I welcome people that don't like the Taliban, of course, that's an argument that could be made, but that's not the only group of people we're getting. And that's the problem with having this open border. Just one of many.
Fair enough. I think we're circling drain on this a bit. There wasn't as much disagreement as I thought there would be on this topic, but fair enough. Let's go to the economy then, right? And this will be the last domestic topic, then we'll get into foreign policy, I promise, right? But I think it would behoove us, since we have an economist here, to talk about the economy, right?
I'll do my
and
best.
We'll pass this to Noah. We'll pass this to Noah first. The economy. There's a lot of people who say we are struggling, that things are going bad, that we have these super high inflations. I see on the opposite end people who say no, the Dow just closed at over 40,000, I think it was, right, if I'm getting my numbers right, and we have a surge in manufacturing, like you said, a surge in all these things, and actually things are pretty good. What's your stance on this, and how specifically has Biden's policies influenced it? And that's what I want to focus on. Go ahead. Noah.
Right. Well, first, let me say first of all, what has been bad about the economy under Biden and what Biden did to make that worse. Let's start with that. What has been bad about Biden is that we had 2 years of high inflation. Roughly 2021 and 2022 were high inflation years. That's the highest inflation we'd seen since the 70s. It made incomes go down. It made wealth go down. It made a bunch of stuff go down that we don't want to go down, right? Wages. It sucked. That inflation sucked. And during that time, there were some Democrats who tried to say things are fine, inflation's not a problem. But I was like, no, people are right to be mad about inflation. If you Google my blog and then the phrase people are right to be mad about inflation, you'll see me very early saying we need to do something about this as fast as we can, as fast as possible. Now, what did Biden do to exacerbate inflation? He spent too much money. So inflation was driven by a number of things, not all of which were Biden's fault. Obviously, there was oil price shock, there was supply chain disruptions, there was leftover savings from the pandemic, all that, I think Trump was right to give people a bunch of money during the pandemic, and that was good, and yet inflation was going to result because people saved up all that money in 2020, spent it in 21. That was going to always cause some inflation. I think Biden poured fuel on the fire by spending too much money in 2021 with the American Rescue Plan. They expected the pandemic to go on much longer than it did. Which is to say they expected people to be hiding out in their houses in 2021 like they did in 2020. And that just didn't happen. People came out, started spending money again. And so they got this policy wrong. I think, yes, there were some things we need that was useful to spend money on. But overall, we just spent way too much money on that plan. And I was warning that's too much spending. And so I think Biden made inflation worse. When you look at it, it was not a huge amount worse, given all the other things that were also causing inflation at the time. But it was noticeably worse that Biden made it, and so that was a mistake. But I'll also say that the things we've done to bring inflation down since 2022 were also things that Biden largely did, and that's pretty cool because I think that Biden he got a late start on inflation fighting. He made it worse, then he got a late start, but then he started doing very effective stuff. The first thing he did was, so Jay Powell, the head of the Fed, was saying, I'm going to raise interest rates to bring down inflation. And a lot of progressives were like, no, you can't raise interest rates. That could put people out of work. You'll hurt the economy, right? Many friends of mine were saying that. No. He was like, nope, we're going to raise interest rates. And he renominated Powell. That was great, right? That, just like, Carter doesn't get enough credit for nominating Volcker. right? Volcker was the guy who creamed the 1970s inflation. He was a Carter appointee, not Reagan reappointed him, but he was originally a Carter appointee, and he did a great job, even though it was very painful that time. This time, it happened not to be very painful, which is good. But Biden was willing to do it, and he renominated Powell, who said he was going to get tough on inflation by raising interest rates. Next, the other thing Biden did was Biden worked very hard to bring down oil prices. So when Biden came in, he was like, I'm going to be an anti-oil guy. I'm going to ban fracking and blah, blah, blah. I'm going to do all this stuff, close pipelines, and I'm going to stop the oil industry because we need to shift to green energy. Then he was like, okay, inflation happened, total reversal. So Biden issued more permits for fracking than Trump did. And he, during his entire presidency, by the way, Biden has just issued a ton. And so oil production now is at a record high, not just for the United States, but for any country in history. The United States now produces more oil, and this was not true under Trump, but the United States now produces more oil than any country that has ever existed ever, including our own past. That is because Biden issued a shit ass ton of permits for fracking because he realized that the idea of rapidly shifting away for oil was just not going to work. He pivoted. He also released oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. I don't know how much that actually did, honestly, because it's not that big a reserve. I don't think it really did that much. Could have sent a signal. And he opened up he went around to other countries and got them to increase some oil production too. That was not that big a deal because it only increased by a little bit. Most of it's fracking. It's us. We're doing it. And so Biden did that to fight inflation. So he reappointed Powell and drilled for oil, which I think have been the main things that have brought inflation down. Is inflation down to where it needs to be? No. It's still about 3, maybe 3.5%, depending on whether you use the CPI or the PCE. That's too high. It's annoying, but it's not anywhere near where it was in 2021, 2022, which is like 8%, right? We brought inflation down so much, and I think most of the decrease was directly through things that Joe Biden did. So I give him a lot of credit on inflation. As for the job market, I think the job market's very strong. I don't know how much credit I give Biden for that because I think it could have gone the other way. Raising interest rates to fight inflation could have thrown people out of work, and we lucked out, and it didn't. I do think the industrial policy, the building the factories, has done some things to benefit employment, but when you look at the numbers, it's only a little bit. I think that Biden's spending has done a little bit to benefit employment. But when you look at the numbers, it's only a bit. So I think that the job market is strong on its own. But I will say there's one other really important thing that Biden did, not Biden himself, but his appointees, his administration did, which was, by the way, if you buy the theory that Biden's just too old, it's all his appointees, well, that's everything. But, okay, but the point is that in 2023, in early 2023, we saw 3 mid-sized regional banks fail. And so that threatened to cause a banking crisis. We quickly squashed it. We really squashed it with very effective measures. In fact, I was writing a post saying, here's what we need to do, and listing a list of measures. And then before I hit publish on the post, a news story came out saying we had done every single one of the things that I was about to suggest. Really fast. It was like 3 days. It took us 3 days to do those things. Now, you talk to people about the great banking crisis of 2023. They're like, what? Oh yeah, there was that bank that failed, Silicon Valley Bank. Actually, there were 3 banks, but yeah. So Biden's appointees, Yellen, especially Yellen, it was mostly Yellen, crushed that financial crisis before it could get started, and that could have hurt the job market, could have really hurt things, and it didn't. It was a nothing burger. Nothing happened because they crushed it really quick. An emergency lending facility and some temporary backstops to this and that deposits, and I could go into that crap, but I won't. Biden has done a really good job in the economy, except for the fact that he spent too much money in his first year and exacerbated inflation in 2021. After that, he got religion and got really good on the economy and has been great since that. There's my thesis.
Okay, Noah, or I'm sorry, Rob. You talk so much, I got your name on my brain. Rob?
Yeah, this is what I've been looking forward to. I very much Let me be clear here. A lot of this muddling through this economic data is difficult for someone who's a novice like me, but I'm doing a good faith effort and I'm trying to go through it as best as possible. So I'm always excited to debate someone in their field. So first off, let's start with this. During the Biden administration, he has increased the deficit so far $5.9 trillion. That's $7.5 trillion that he spent. So ask yourself this question. That's basically on track to what Trump would have spent, and that includes Trump's what I think was disastrous fourth year, where they spent way too much money. But that was during a pandemic. Now, I'm not excusing Trump. One of the things that I think Noah and I could probably agree on is some of this massive spending, or a large group of this massive spending, occurred before Biden was in office. Now, Biden would have supported that spending, and Democrats wanted even more spending. But it is true. We can't, that if you're someone who's a fiscal conservative that wants to look at Trump and ignore the massive spending he had, you're making a huge mistake. However, I think we could both give credit to the fact that whatever the reason, because we embrace things like lockdowns, that was going to intuit that we had to spend a bunch of money, something I disagreed with the lockdowns and I disagreed with the spending. But that would understand why 2020 saw that massive spending. The fact that Biden's on pace to almost equal over 4 years the 4 years of Trump had, including that massive year, shows just how much money he spent. And ask yourself this, have we got a good bang for our buck? With all of this money being spent, is your life getting better? Is your purchasing power increasing? No, it looks like real wages over the course of Biden's presidency is down 4.4%, your actual purchasing power when you include the wages that went up. Let's look at some numbers, the actual on-the-ground real-world situation. Average consumer debt, $23,000. Only 7% of Americans make $150,000. 37% of Americans aren't investing for retirement. 66% are living paycheck to paycheck. 43% are say they're going to be in debt for the next 1 to 5 years. Price of gasoline's gone up 30%. Lumber's gone up 347%. We have things like wheat that's gone up 43%. Shelter costs are up 20.9%. Gas prices in car insurance, 51%. Vehicle repairs 40%. Groceries up 20%. The fast food index, the vaunted Big Mac index that people used to use because that's something that sort of price controls and government intervention doesn't have much influence on. Depending on the numbers you're looking at, are up as high as 80%. These are the real situations on the ground. So while you got a nominal increase in your wage on average, and keep in mind, because of the disastrous policies of the lockdown plus stimulus, we saw a large transfer of wealth from poor and working class to upper class people. So we shouldn't even be looking at the mean. We should be looking at the median. The median household is struggling. Inflation hurts poor people more because they use a higher percentage of their income for these resources like food, gas, things like that. And they are struggling. So I saw Noah was retweeting out something today where it was like 50-something% of people think we're in a recession. And technically we're not in a recession. And Noah's right to point out that there are people that are like, why can't we get this across the American people? It's because the technical definition of a recession doesn't matter to the average person. No one wants to hear, well, technically, this is the exact definition of what they mean when they say we think we're in a recession is we're struggling. We can't get by. Credit card debt at all-time highs. I think it's at $11 trillion. The median home now costs 7.6 times the household income. That's even higher than the 2006-2008 housing bubble. Young people are being left behind. They can't afford homes. They can't afford cars. They can't even afford to go out to eat. And so while all of this is happening and we see the inflation increasing, now we're told, well, it's dipped. And I said this from the get-go, again, as an economic novice. Imagine if I told you the price of milk would be up 40% in 4 years under a presidency. If that happened 10% per year, you would say, oh, inflation's remained the same. But if it happened 35% the first year and then 5% over the next 3, people would be celebrating, saying, see, we beat inflation. That's tantamount to what happened in the Biden administration. Because of the massive spending that they put forth and the disastrous policies, and not just the spending, but where they were spending it, prioritizing it in many times overseas to a bunch of things that weren't really beneficial to the average American, we now see these prices skyrocketing, and we're being told, oh, don't believe your lying eyes, things are going down, inflation's going down. Inflation's not decreasing. The amount of the cost of these products isn't decreasing. The rate that they're increasing is slipping. But oh, guess what? Now it's going up. So inflation's actually increasing expectations. According to the Fed notes from the other day, you heard Noah talk about how, well, Jerome Powell was raising rates, which people were worried about because they thought it could hurt things like the stock market, but it would slow inflation. Now the Fed notes suggest, whoops, they're going to stop those hikes. And people are saying the scuttlebutt is, here come the rate collapses again. They're going to cut the rates again. And what we're seeing is actually tantamount to what's going to possibly be stagflation. You can see that 19 states now have decreasing job numbers. The job numbers, the labor force participation is still below levels that it was before the pandemic. So all these jobs that are being created, it's just jobs that we lost because of the disastrous lockdown policies, which I have to wag my finger at Noah. I think from looking into your record, you supported those lockdowns. So because we shut people down and forced them out of work, and now we're letting them come back to work, we say, oh, that's great, we've created all these jobs, but we still don't have the labor force participation we had pre-pandemic. And even GDP now is coming in at a third of the rates that they estimated it coming through in. So it looks like the actual growth in GDP of our country is far missing what expectations were, while we're seeing inflation start to rebound, and we were told it was all going to be the opposite. We were told inflation, we turned the corner, we beat it, and now we have this massive job growth, and we have this massive burgeoning economy, and it doesn't look like that. And so unfortunately, and maybe we'll get Noah's predictions here, I predict in the next 8 to 10 months, we're going to see inflation continue to rise, even if it's just marginally, and we're going to see the GDP and the actual wealth of this country decrease, which probably will lead us to an official recession.
Lots been said. Go ahead, Noah.
So my first point that I'd like to make is that almost everything you just said was wrong.
That's fine. You can go.
But I will help. Sure. I will help. GDP growth is good. GDP growth is very healthy. It is not a third of what people said it would be. It is higher than forecasts. It is far higher than the rest of the developed world. If you look at America's economy, it's been like this. The rest of the developed world really slowed after COVID. We've done better than like any other rich country in the world in terms of growth. So growth is great. Labor market, labor force participation rate when you include old people is down, because guess why? The baby boomers are old and they are retiring. But when you look at labor force participation among people 25 to 54, the prime age working people, it's way up. But the real number you should look at is employment rates. Employment rates are the percent of people that have jobs, right? The percent of people that actually have a job. And if you want to look at full-time or part-time, it's the same thing. But or you can look at the number of people who have full-time jobs or the number of people who have all jobs. Either way you look at it, if you look at prime age, employment rates, they're not quite all-time highs because they were a little bit higher in the late 90s, but they're as high as they were in 2019, 2018, whatever. They're pretty much the highest they've been at around between 80 and 81%. That's really great. Everybody's got a job. And when you say we're not in a recession, I don't mean some wonky number like, oh, look, this number technically came in, because actually what determines a recession is just whether or not some economists somewhere say it is, right? It's not even some number. It's just some economist's judgment. My point is the job market's amazing. Everybody who wants a job has a job. We've even seen the disabled come back to work at unprecedented rates. We've seen disabled people come back to work. We've seen, yes, the baby boomers are retiring. I understand that. America's getting older. But the job market is really the best it's been. Now, let's talk about wealth. And if you look at real wealth, we have a very good survey, the survey of consumer finances, and you look between 2019 and 2022, right? And 2022 was a bad inflation year, all right? So that was a year that inflation really hit people pretty hard, and 2021. So this is after the worst of the inflation hit people. You look at real wealth, which is wealth adjusted for inflation, it went up. It went up by more for young people, more for poor people, more for renters, more for rural people. Wealth went up. People's wealth went up, and you say, oh, the house prices have increased by so much, they can't even afford a house. Well, okay, that's true, but it is a fact of life in America that most people's wealth, unless you're rich, comes from your house. So when you talk about the value of a house going up, everybody people like it when the value of their house goes up, because, large majority of Americans are homeowners or live in a home-owning household at least. People like when their house gets more valuable because, then you're richer when your house is more valuable. And so wealth has been doing well. Also, if you look at debt, total credit card debt numbers have been going up. But debt relative to income The reason they've been going up is just inflation, like everything else. But if you look at debt relative to income, that has gone down. People are much less in debt than they used to be, especially before the financial crisis of 2008. I'm old enough to remember that. But people are just, they've delevered. They're in less debt, and the money that we spent during the pandemic, yes, which included all the money Trump spent, but also the money Biden spent too. People use that to pay down their debts. And one reason why wealth for the middle class, for the working class, is at these all-time highs, is because they pay down debts, and debt subtracts from your wealth. So when you have wealth, you have your assets, your liabilities. You pay down your liabilities with money the government hands you, which is why we gave them the money in the first place, to pay down those debts. They pay down the debts. And so now, between the increase in house prices and the increase in house prices, those houses aren't owned by some big company. It's not like increase in food prices where it's like going to some Asian chicken or something, right? It's the houses are owned by the middle class and the working class of America. And so that means an increase in wealth. Between that and the debt decrease, we've seen wealth go up. In terms of wages, real wages, when there was this weird spike during the pandemic where everybody, got laid off their job for like 6 months or something like that, and wages went way up because the rich people all got to keep their jobs, and it was the poor people who got temporarily laid off. That sucked. Sorry, it was pandemic. It was shitty. But then it went right back down. And then if you subtract out that little spike and you look at the trend, it's just a smooth upward trend. Now, it was up during Trump too, and that's great, right? All credit to Trump. Good job, Trump. But under Biden, if you take out that 1 year pandemic spike, which was basically because, the poor people temporarily lost their jobs, so their wages weren't counted in the average, then you see wages just, go up. Wages under Biden have gone up more for the working class than for top earners. The people who've gained the most are the people in the bottom 20% or bottom 40% of the distribution. It's cashiers and clerks and delivery people and drivers and, just the people that I don't know, maybe you think they're invisible and maybe you don't care about them, but Democrats used to care about those guys a lot, the working class, and Republicans sometimes say they care about them. I'm not sure who really cares about those guys, but I think Biden does, because he's from the very old. One advantage of being old is that he's old enough to remember when Democrats really cared a lot about the working class. And so I think he really cared about those blue collar people, those lower wage earners, and their wages have done especially well. And I've got links to just tons of data to show that. So wealth has done well, income's done well, jobs have done well. This is not a recession. Are people upset and angry about stuff that's going on in American society? They are. But when you look at consumer sentiment, right, you see that Republicans are just unusually mad. The reason why consumer sentiment is low under Biden is because Republicans are unusually mad. And when you talk about the evidence of their eyes, to the hardcore Republican, it's not their eyes. Because when you do surveys about how you're doing financially, people report they're doing financially great. Surveys of people. You call people up and say, hey, person, how are you doing financially? People say, I'm doing great, but the national economy, that's shit. My town is doing great, but the national economy, that's terrible. And you see this pattern again and again. I can show you a million surveys. People say their own personal economic circumstances are doing great. It's only the national economy because they're reading the news. And, and these are Republicans who are saying it's bad, right? They're reading the news. And honestly, Rob, they're reading guys like you who say everything's terrible. And they think everything's terrible, but they think somehow I escaped this. Somehow I'm doing fine. Everyone else out there is doing terrible. But guess what? Everybody thinks this. Okay. Because I'm not doing terrible. So the economy's good.
Yeah, I want to get into the back and forth, right? You guys both are talkers. I'm going to let you know you both love it. But let's get to the back and forth. So go ahead.
Okay, so first off,
it's next, by the way, so we should get to foreign policy at some point.
Yeah.
We will. Don't worry. That's why I'm trying to. The monologues are great.
We could wrap this up quick if you want. I'll say this. First off, I misspoke when I talked about the GDP. The GDP slowed by a third last quarter, so we're now barely above population growth. When you consider the fact that we don't know between 10 and 30 million illegals that are in this country, so actually we see that GDP is slowing. It's trajecting downward. Inflation is trajecting upward. upwards. So there's two ways to look at this. There is the economy that we've already had with the Biden presidency, and we can see that that is an economy of people struggling, of inflation at the people at the bottom, even if their wages technically have risen at a slightly higher percentage than the people at the top of the bracket. As I said, inflation's going to harm them more, because if you're someone who's, at the top of the bracket, it doesn't matter for you that much if grocery prices go up 20%, because you're still spending basically a fixed amount on groceries. Basically, you're not eating 100 times more because you're 100 times more wealthy. So there's a higher percentage of the pie that you have to spend on your income for these necessities like gasoline, etc. So even if it's true that someone that's in the service industry, or the restaurant industry, etc., has received a slightly higher percentage wage bump, their real wages are actually down when you consider the fact that they're spending more when it comes to inflation. So we could look at that historically, and you see the numbers that I showed. You see the people that their savings are going down. That's another thing I didn't talk about, household savings that are cratering. You can see the credit card debt going up. I'll talk about that a little more in a second here. But at the same time, you can see that what we're told is, but we've rounded the corner. Okay, you suffered through those tough times, but now here it comes. Everything's going great. But that's not the case. We were told that it was transitory. Now we can see inflation's turning back up when everyone told us, it looks like that we're past that. Now we can see that GDP is actually slowing when we were told, no, GDP is going to take off. So the numbers are actually trajecting to a way that is not looking positive for the future. So when you look at that complete picture, the prices that people are paying right now, or that have paid throughout the Biden presidency, right? And we're told, but don't worry about that because it's going to get better. But now it looks like the direction isn't going to get that much better. A couple short things that were talked about. The idea of, well, people spent all this extra money that they had on paying down debt. It's not true. Household savings are incredibly low. More people are in debt. So, for example, here's one piece of evidence I found. 1 in 6 Americans from the poorest 10% of zip codes are in credit card delinquency. The share of people in delinquency in these areas have increased from 11% in Q2 2021 to 17%. So it's gone up almost 50%. The highest that it's been in 21 years. People are financing their groceries. They're financing their gasoline. They're financing their rent. That's what's occurring to people at the poorest levels. And on the averages, it's looking okay because the incredibly wealthy, or the GDP of the country has grown somewhat. But you expect that anyways. On a linear trajectory, you would expect just without any intervention that the GDP would continue to grow. The problem has been the spending, which has caused inflation. And remember, if I was made in charge tomorrow and I wanted to make my area here of Clarion County, Pennsylvania, financially successful, and you let me spend $1 trillion, I guarantee I'd be able to come up with policies that would benefit people financially. Biden's spending at a record pace, close to what Trump with the pandemic spent, and what are the results we're getting? And so I don't believe this argument. I'd be interested in seeing the specific data that individuals are like, yeah, I'm doing good, but I just watched too much Fox News. The idea that sort of the national media is carrying water against the Biden administration is sort of ludicrous. But I think that it is evident that people's savings are going down, their purchasing power is going down. And, we've seen these statistics. I know you sort of talked about it. What was the exact number? Under Trump, the earnings that went up was, what was it, like 15%, something like that? And under Biden, people's wealth went up 15%. Under Biden, it's 0.7. And the argument that we're given with that is like, well, yeah, but that has to do with because, the pandemic and things like that, and because of the massive spending that we had. I don't disagree that some of that spending was a problem, but still we see spending rates continue, and that wealth's just not coming back. People aren't seeing it. People lost small businesses. Many of the jobs that are being created for people. In fact, I believe I read a statistic somewhere that said almost every job created was created for a foreign-born person.
I don't know.
So let me finish this point. Let me finish this point real quick. So in other words, the jobs that we're talking about, almost all of them have been for foreign-born people. So the people that were citizens of this country that grew up living here, they're not seeing this recovery. They're seeing increased prices.
Okay, I don't know if you guys know the meaning of back and forth, right? But you guys keep doing this where it's like point after point after point. Let's
right.
do one at a time.
Almost every single thing that you said was wrong in that list. And I could go. I'm sorry, I got to tell the truth. This is all wrong. Like, for example, all the jobs created were for immigrants. No. Baby boomers retired. Tons of jobs are created for Americans of working age. Tons of new jobs. And then immigrants got jobs too. Employment rates are at like record highs, near record highs, not counting the labor.
Can I just to clarify,
No, Rob, come on.
I was just asking a clarifying question. If you don't want, that's fine.
You just gave me 20 wrong points, and now you want, and now
Okay.
I talk
But
about
you
one
go
wrong
ahead.
point.
I was just trying to clarify. Go for it.
Okay. Like, food consumption is up. People are buying more food. I'm not talking about in terms of how many dollars it costs them at the cash register. I'm talking about how many more rutabagas and sandwiches and burgers and whatever. People are going out to eat more than they ever have before. People are just consuming much more food per person than they've ever consumed in America. And you'd think if people were struggling, people are actually eating more. And I'm not talking about some average where you have one fat guy who brings up the average by eating all the shit. I'm talking about your like median household consumption of food is when people are eating the food. And I just can't understand how this narrative of people like, you know, who can't have all this food is, you know, obviously there's always some poor people in America who cannot get food, and I want to help those people. That's why I'm a Democrat. But if you look at your typical person, they're just eating more food now than they did under Trump. They're eating more. And I just don't square that with this idea that people can't buy the food because they have the food. And so I don't like it. It's a fantasy. It's like this fantasy extended universe, this like bad economy fantasy extended universe that we're in. I can show you the data saying people say their own personal economic situation's fine, but if you just look at consumption data and you adjust it for prices, so you're not looking at dollars, you're looking at actual amount of stuff, people are just buying more stuff than they ever have in America before. And I just don't understand how to square this with the idea that we have this horrible economy. It's not real. It is not real. And okay, I'm done.
You want me to respond or?
Yeah, no, go.
Are there less
back and forth is back and forth, but back and forth means 1 point at a time.
Pre-pandemic?
Yeah.
Pre-pandemic, you said when I said that these jobs all went to foreigners. Are there less American-born people working today in the United States than there were pre-pandemic?
Of working age, no, there's a lot more.
In total.
Well, baby boom retirement, buddy.
Okay.
Baby boom
nonetheless.
retirement. And old people, you're like, oh, but this 75-year-old isn't working because he retired. Bad economy. If we had Trump in there, that 75-year-old would still be working. No.
So just to answer the question, in totality, it's that there are less. Yes.
This completely unrepresentative economic statistic that I just pulled to make a point that isn't actually a good point about the economy. Is that actually true?
I don't think you're doing
That's
so.
no. That's not
As
how
an
to think.
economist, I don't
My
think you're
point.
doing so well. And the
Employment
mocking voice isn't helping your
Employment rate
case
for working
whatsoever.
age people at all-time highs. Employment rate for working age people at all-time highs. Yes or no?
That could be true.
Yes
I
or
don't
no?
know. Okay, let's say yes. I'll
Could be
answer.
true, I don't know.
I don't know, but
I'll
I'll
answer
take your
yes.
word for it.
Good.
But okay, the hyperbolic interactions isn't suiting you so well. Sounds like you're getting a little frustrated here for some reason. Anyways, the point is, right? The point is,
really frustrated because fantasy economics is one thing that I like. You know, it's a thing that I know. It's not
let's
like
talk.
it's
All right.
not a matter of
If you want to get a little sharper with it, did you support the initial lockdowns, Mr. Economist?
Yes,
How'd that work?
because nobody was going out and buying anything anyway.
All right.
Everybody,
That's not true.
Everybody was staying home
That's not
because they
true.
were scared of shit.
That's not true.
It is.
It's not true.
It is.
That's absolutely not. So you're telling me that all the businesses
Prove
that
it.
okay,
Prove it.
okay,
Prove it.
I'll prove it. I know at least 5 small businesses that were forced to shut down that were doing phenomenal business when they were forced to shut down. They were doing good business during the pandemic, but the state of Pennsylvania forced them to shut down at the time. You're telling me that no one would have went out, that no one was upset about lockdowns because they were all staying at home anyways? That's what you're telling me?
I'm saying that, yeah, isn't it, all these businesses were going to absolutely suffer from people staying home.
They might have suffered somewhat, but they weren't going to suffer near to the levels what they did. In fact, if we would have had a more sober-minded approach, other than what economists like you, please, if we'd had a more if we would have had a more sober-minded approach, other than what economists like you and many other fearmongers were doing, we would have told people that actually the data was remarkable. That what we even saw early was the pandemic was of low risk to working age people and people that were engaged in the working market. The average age of death of COVID is actually beyond the average life expectancy in the United States. It's something like 78. This was a pandemic that affected people with severe comorbidities and the very old. And what we did was we shut down the biggest economy in the history of the world in order to fight this pandemic to protect people. And then in many places, like in Pennsylvania, we actually took people that had COVID and put them in nursing homes. So we said that you had to stop the economy or else grandma would get sick and die. So we shut down the economy and then we forced COVID patients into nursing homes. It was these sort of disastrous policies that lead to where we are. So when you talk about fake economic statistics and you want to make fun of people, I just want people to take with a grain of salt the fact that you are an economist who cheered for a policy that intentionally sabotaged the United States and world economy. That's what you did.
That's nuts. No, because Sweden didn't do any lockdowns. Yes
Yeah.
or no? Did Sweden do lockdown?
Not near to the extent, almost no. I'll say no for the sake of
Sweden
argument.
didn't do lockdown.
Sure.
Okay. Did Sweden's economy do better than other places?
I believe so.
No, it did the same. It did the exact same.
I think it did
Everywhere
marginally better.
around it. Denmark, Norway, Finland. You look at these, they're just the same curve. In America, some places enforced lockdowns. So I lived in San Francisco where there was like something that was sort of like a real lockdown here. People like didn't go outside. Like that was San Francisco, was the harshest lockdown in the country. But over in Texas, people were just doing stuff. They were like, fuck this lockdown. And they didn't really do it. Right. And you can look at Google mobility data to show that people were going to restaurants and doing all this stuff in defiance of lockdowns, and it didn't really take. And yet, did you see like worse economic outcomes in the places that had lockdown? No, it was the exact same economic outcome everywhere.
That's not true.
You didn't. I can show you the research.
It's not true.
The lockdowns didn't do shit.
So
maybe they saved some lives.
So, for example, just looking real quick here, Sweden had less severe economic contraction. Sweden's economy shrank less than the Eurozone at the height of the pandemic, with quarterly GDP contraction of only 9%. Preservation of jobs, please.
Compared to the actual countries nearby.
Right. Well, that's what.
Compared to like Spain and Greece.
But it's compared to the Eurozone and all. The other thing I want to make, can I ask you a question? Okay, well, then I'll look into the specific data, how it did compared to Finland and places. We could look at that. Let me ask you this question. Was there a higher death toll in Sweden? Years afterwards was the average. It was about the same. So in other words, the lockdown did nothing. It didn't help save lives. Okay, so let me finish, Wick, please. So that's point one. Point two I want to make is the reason is when the entire world locked down, if one country that's not like the biggest producer or consumer in the world doesn't lock down, they're still going to suffer greatly economically. What we could see is even in the United States, the places that locked down less actually had better economic outsets. To the point now you could see when it comes to job creation, we could see the 10 states. Of the 10 states that still have less jobs than before the pandemic, actually, they're blue states. Red states are doing remarkably better when it came to job creation. So what I want to get you to admit, as you've already done, the lockdowns had no benefit. They didn't save lives. And what they did as a whole in the United States and in the world was stymied our global economy and supply chains. And for you as an economist to say, but if one country didn't lock down and their economy went down, that proves that it wouldn't have mattered is nonsensical, because they are so intertwined with the rest of the world economy that if the rest of the world economy embraced the policies as an economist that you suggested of lockdowns, that it was going to predictably lead to these things occurring. The idea that you're trying to say that it wouldn't have shut the economy down as much to not lock down if that was the policy of the United States and the world is nonsensical. And it doesn't matter what data you try to spin. Everyone who's paying attention could see that is a nonsensical position.
Response, and then we're going to get to foreign policy.
Okay. I think lockdowns were not as effective as I expected. But I think also they were not very damaging either. Because when I look at why, when I look across different countries and I look at what happened to these countries depending on like what lockdown policies they did, I see very little variance. I think that what happened was that everybody just stayed home because, we have the internet and everyone knew there was a pandemic out there. And then we're like, okay, well, we're also not allowing you to do this and this. That was a good idea. But I'm not sure it had that big an effect ultimately.
Okay. Gang, we are, you guys talk a lot.
I got to go in 10 minutes. I
know. I don't know if we're going to get to foreign policy, unfortunately.
Maybe we won't get to foreign policy.
Well, you got 10 minutes. We could do it for the next 10 minutes, I guess.
Right.
You want to just do Afghanistan? You had it in your paper? Is that fair? Just because you talked about it. You go first if you want.
Afghanistan.
All right. So Afghanistan, the only deaths in the American withdrawal from Afghanistan were from a bombing by a random splinter Islamist group that the Taliban's actually fighting. that sucked that bombing happened and those people died. But when you withdraw from a country very quickly, it is really dangerous, and it is remarkable. The Taliban killed 0 Americans on the way out. That astonished me. I assumed that if we did pull out, it would be like in Vietnam, with the Taliban were like shooting at us on the way out, shooting at the helicopters, you know, just like killing American servicemen on the way out, because we did lose a bunch of American servicemen on the way out of Vietnam. Yeah, there was that bombing, but the Taliban themselves killed 0 Americans on the way out. That's impressive. I'm impressed. And Afghanistan was not a thing that we should have stayed in forever. The idea of a forever war was really stupid. And Trump refused to get us out because he knew it would be a PR hit. And Obama refused to get out, even though Obama pulled out most of our troops after the death of bin Laden. He refused to pull out all of our troops because he knew he would take a PR hit. I was just like, fuck it. I'm going to take the PR hit. I'm going to do it. Because keeping our army in that country to babysit those people and to, you know, forever was not a viable option. And I was against that. We did what we came to do. We got bin Laden. We killed the Al-Qaeda guys. We even killed the specific Taliban guys who had harbored them and who had been in charge, like Mullah Omar. I'm old enough to remember. Killed him. We killed a bunch of those guys. And you know what? Afghanistan is a crappy country where, you know, it has no good economy, and we can't just give it one. It's this insanely violent, backwards country. Our army sitting around, you know, 14,000 American troops or whatever, sitting around cannot babysit that country into becoming like we're not going to make it become Japan. We're not going to make it become Germany. We're not going to make it become like a liberal democracy. And whoever thought that we should keep our like troops there forever and ever and ever and ever and ever was wrong. I know there's those people out there. They're neocons. They're wrong. We did what we came to do when we got out. That was the right thing to do. Could we have handled the refugee situation better by taking in those translators and those people who worked for us? Yes. But why didn't Biden do that? Is it because he's just a dick? No. It's because MAGA people are like, oh my God, Muslims, you know, oh my God, you're going to let all those people in. It was immigration restriction, pressure from Republicans not wanting, you know, that kept Biden from actually taking in those people. It wasn't just because Biden's like, oh, I hate translators. Screw you guys. No. Anyway, that frustrated me, and that was the biggest problem with our pullout is that we didn't take all those people immediately who worked for us. We did betray many of them. We took some of them later.
Just
anyway,
real quick,
there's my thesis about Afghanistan.
Great. I'm going to enforce stricter time limits since you got to go in 10 minutes. I want to make sure there's at least some.
I do.
So you got 2 minutes. He's had 2 minutes. You got 2 minutes,
Okay.
Rob. Go.
All right, so I agree that we should have pulled out. Don't have a problem with that. The problem I have is the way that we pulled out. It was a disaster. They closed down Bagram Air Base, a secure air base, and then relied on an air base that was controlled by the Taliban. The Taliban went into Bagram Air Base, freed ISIS, who then bombed our U.S. soldiers, killing 13 of them and civilians. Why would we rely on the very enemy that we had been fighting for 20 years to protect us, particularly when we knew that they already released ISIS? Then what happened, because Joe Biden had egg on his face, was he bombed ISIS-K, which was really just a translator and a bunch of kids. He did that to try to change the news cycle and seem like a tough guy because he showed his fecklessness and weakness. There were people hanging off the engines of planes trying to leave. Other disasters that occurred during this. We left $7 billion worth of weapons and equipment that now has armed our enemy, the Taliban, and which they're using now to further enslave their own people, particularly people that Democrats should care about, such as LGBT and women people. 78,000 Afghan allies left behind. We also saw 5,000 to 9,000 Americans left behind. We did not properly vet the Afghan refugees, and there's been a Republican House committee that showed how the OIG report showed how none of the proper vetting procedures were used. Lastly, we now find out just from April, I'll quote from CNN, hours of closed-door testimony from 3 top State Department officials shed new light in the unprecedented situations of the final day of Afghanistan. 3 officials, John Bass, Jim DeHart, and Jane Howe, who were all plucked from unrelated assignments and rushed into Afghanistan in the hours after Kabul fell due to the Taliban, due to their experience. When you listen to these 3 officials and you read the article, they're basically told, we were given no forewarning. There was no plan. They just threw us in there and said, okay, do your best. Try to get people out. I'm sorry, I don't think it's a success that as many as 9,000 Americans were left behind. I'm sorry, I don't think it's a success that children got bombed by the U.S. government. I don't think it's a success that over 70,000 Afghans that helped us fight in that war were left. And I don't think it's a success that we left $7 billion of military equipment to now arm a country or a group that we were fighting for 20 years to make them one of the most powerful militaries in the area. We'll be told 10 years from now that we have to go back to fight terrorists because all of a sudden they mysteriously got these weapons and trainings and things like that we didn't know about. So I was shocked to see in your blog post that you said, I agree with you that we should pull out, but you said you thought it was relatively a success. It was one of the biggest foreign policy blunders in my lifetime, and it sent a signal of weakness that's probably largely responsible for why we see Russia and Chinese aggression today.
Okay, and with that, let's get into it, gang. Go ahead. We have limited time, remember. So, yeah.
Why wouldn't they keep
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. It's back and forth.
Can you give me one reason that they wouldn't have kept the secure military airbase in Bagram and evacuate all of our people first? Can you give me one reason?
The Taliban didn't even kill anybody of our people.
They freed ISIS, who did.
Listen. Okay, no. Look, you're like, oh, we gave this base to the Taliban. The Taliban used it to kill precisely 0 of our people. About those refugees, if we had let in 78,000 Afghans who worked for us, I would bet so much money, and I wish there were a way to settle this bet. I wish there were a way to see this. I would bet so much money that you'd be howling your head off saying, look at all these people we're letting in. Do we vet them? No. All these Muslims? Look, all these people, how are we letting these all in? Like it's open borders season. Republicans, conservatives, MAGA people would just be screeching their heads off if we'd let those people in. It's easy to say, oh, we should have let those guys in. I think we should have let those guys in. I honestly think we should have let those guys in. I'm sure that everyone in MAGA would be, I was screeching their heads off if we let 78,000 Muslim Afghan guys right into our country.
Do you hear them screeching now? That's what happened. So how loud are they screeching? Because what happened was we did take 70,000 something Afghans. We just didn't vet them. See, the proper procedure would have been to have been planning months ahead and make sure that we had a secure airbase secured by our military, that the Taliban wasn't attacking, to get the people that we could vet that legitimately worked with the United States. If you have to ask me, Rob, would you rather have 70,000 people that the military vetted for 2 months that actually actively worked with our military in fighting Afghanistan, have them come to the United States, or 70,000 random Afghanis who we did no vetting? I guarantee you I wouldn't have been screeching as loud. I guarantee I would have said, yes, if those people actually fought with our armed services and helped and it was vetted and proved so, they deserve to be able to come here. I can't
claim that the vetting was bad or faulty, or like Biden's vetting process was bullshit, and therefore they're just really unvetted.
You could make that claim, but you could make that claim if the vetting had been done properly. It wouldn't have been an argument that been had. If the vetting wouldn't have been properly, perhaps that's an argument I would have had. But that hypothetical situation's irrelevant in the world where Biden's team didn't plan according to people in his own State Department. They gave up a secure airbase. They left behind 5,000 to 9,000 Americans. They left behind 70,000 people that were working with
5,000 to 9,000 Americans. You think they're dead or in Taliban prison?
I have no idea. Ask the State Department. It was what the Inspector General came up with.
No, if we would be hearing about if the Taliban had taken thousands of American prisoners. It's fantasy. This is a fantasy extended universe.
So the IG report's incorrect.
There are not 5,000 to 9,000 Americans stuck in Afghanistan. I'll bet you all the money in the world. No, that is fantasy.
So okay.
Fantasy.
On that, no.
The Wheel of Time. That's Game of Thrones. That's fantasy.
How many are left behind?
Hold on. Hey, we got a hard out, right? So I'm gonna have to throw a flag on the play, give you guys some closing statements, and then we got to get out of here, unfortunately. Thank you, gang, for coming today. This has been a feisty one. I appreciate it. It has been, I'm not sure edifying's the right word, but I enjoyed it. Gang, if you like this content, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. I'm going to get each of these lovely individuals an outro, and then we'll end the show. We're going to start with Rob.
Rob first.
Are we doing like overview of the debate? and then
Closing
an outro.
statements. Closing thoughts. And
Okay.
tell people who you like.
Just
combine the two.
Okay,
Go ahead.
just to say it real quick, this is actually from the Senate Afghanistan report on August 17, 2021. At the height of the evacuation, State Department officials said there were 10 to 15,000 Americans in Afghanistan. By August 31st, when the president ordered evacuation, they only were able to get approximately 6,000. So that means that there is 5 to 9,000 that are still left there, according to the Senate's investigation zone number, or you could just trust Noah and his data. Look, I think I made the case quite clearly when it came to all of the
name one. You can't name a name of them.
That's sure I can't. Can you name one?
You could name the name of one guy who was killed in the Floyd riots. You could name the name of one American who's been trapped in Afghanistan Taliban prison.
Can you name?
Okay. These are closing statements.
One.
Well,
Noah. Okay, Noah. We can't interrupt closing statements. We'll get into it. I promise. You can make your point. But Rob, uninterrupted.
So it seems like the point Snow is trying to make, if you can't name one person, then that proves that there's not even one that was still left there. That is nonsensical. Again, I'm using actual data. He's talking
different things.
You can't even follow the decorum.
Please, both of you. We gotta go one at a time. Noah, I understand, but you gotta let Rob talk. Rob, and then you'll get your uninterrupted time. I promise you. Rob, go ahead.
I too would interrupt and not follow decorum of debate if I was doing as poorly as Noah was. So I understand it. You could trust
Rob,
him.
you lost every point in this debate.
There we go.
You did not get. You lost
Okay.
every point in this debate, Rob.
I'm gonna have to do this. I'm
You
gonna
just yelled more points.
I'm muting you both. Okay. I promise you that you'll get your uninterrupted times, but you gotta be uninterrupted. Rob, go ahead. Try not to poke the bear.
What's fun in
Go
that?
ahead.
Anyway, so when we look at the broad picture of what happened in this debate, there's two ways to look at this. First, did the case be made that Biden did well? I don't think it did. On the immigration debate, basically he concedes everything and says, yeah, I agree, Biden didn't do that well. I thought my points were salient. I talked about how the increase happened under Biden. He didn't really have a good reason other than, well, maybe Trump wouldn't do a good a job as anyways. So win that portion of the debate clearly. On the crime portion of the debate, he's unresponsive to the things I was talking about, why crime is a big voting issue, because it occurs in places that are different types of crimes, property crimes, and areas that normally weren't having these crimes. We talked specifically about how he wanted to focus on homicide numbers, but there's more homicide under Joe Biden in his 4 years than there would be under Trump, and people were feeling unsafe. He wasn't really responsive to that. We just talked minutially on how those data sets might come. I don't think he did a particularly good job on that. When it gets into the economic debate that we've focused on specifically, he could spin it all the ways he wants and say all of the data is wrong, it's wrong, it's wrong. People could see what's going on with their prices. They see that these prices are massively increasing. It's hurting poorer Americans that have to have a bigger percentage of their money being spent on necessities like rent, groceries, gasoline, and things of that nature. We could see that things are trending in a bad direction. We see actually inflation's going up, even though we were told, no, we crossed the hump. We could see that GDP went down by a third in the last quarter. So it's pointing to signs of stagflation. I'm predicting that we're going to see increased economic misery as we go forward and probably a recession going forward. Perhaps I'll be wrong about that, but I'm going on record. Let's see if Noah will go on record what his prediction will be coming forward. And then maybe we could come back to 6-7 months and see who's more accurate on that. But when we focus then particularly on, we didn't get to talk about corruption and all the things that Biden was terrible about that. The Afghanistan, you could see the debacle there. He doesn't really have an answer. It's just like, no, it was good. There weren't really Americans there. It's a disaster. The pullout was a disaster, and he doesn't have a response to any of the points that I made, including the leaving of the weapons there, the leaving of the Afghan refugees, the refusal to vet, the fact that there was no plan, the fact that he couldn't give an answer as to why we would close Bagram. None of it. He doesn't have a response. He just sort of responded smugly. But the thing I want you to think about the most at the end of this debate, when you're talking economics, we could bring a person with a PhD in here to argue against Noah, and they could go one by one over each economic source and talk about what these numbers really mean, and et cetera, et cetera. And they'd probably be able to have the minutia of that better than someone like me who's pointing more of a mainstream image of what's going on with the economy, although I think accurately, as the people that watch the debate will see. But when you're questioning whether or not who you should believe on the interpretation of this, know this. Noah is an economist. Noah suggested lockdowns. Noah admitted that the lockdowns in places like Sweden, the fact that they didn't, it showed that lockdowns didn't really save lives. And yet he's trying to gaslight you, the audience, that locking down didn't really negatively affect the economy. Now, every one of you, whether you like me, like Noah, like Biden, like Trump, or anywhere in between, knows that's bullshit. You all know that's bullshit. So why would he do that? Why would he try to gaslight you like that? And I would tell you that that's exactly the type of argument that the Biden administration is making and that Noah's making when it comes to these economic arguments and other things in Biden's administration in general. They are telling you blatant bullshit. They might know more about the data than you because it's their job. They might be able to get into the minutia of it and make it sound impressive as they rattle off numbers, but they're really gaslighting you. And when it gets right down to brass tacks, and economist Noah supported these lockdowns, lies about it not negatively affecting the economy, and a layman like me knew that those lockdowns were a terrible idea and would be a disaster for the economy. I did that all with just being a rural redneck without a fancy PhD in economics.
Okay. Thank you. Gang, where can you find you? Rob, where can they find you?
Normal America with Rob Noor on YouTube, and just Rob Noor, Noerr, on most platforms.
Okay. Thank you. And I'm going to trust you won't interrupt, and we'll see how this goes. Noah, your turn. And I see you guys are super fast. I'll get to them.
Yeah, the reason I won this debate is because people could see that while I was willing to actually carefully consider each point, Rob read off a list of prepared talking points. If you are already deeply ensconced in the MAGA extended fantasy universe, then you will understand glossolalia, speaking in tongues, like, GDP went down by a third, and other just completely, made up pieces of bullshit. Again and again, Rob was like, oh, I misspoke this number, because he didn't understand any of the numbers that he was saying. What happened is that he's in this fantasy extended universe, and he's part of a network of fantasy authors who writes talking points like, GDP went down by a third, Americans are, native-born Americans have lost their jobs, and Bagram Air Force, and blah, 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 and all this stuff, which again and again, he just said things that were just flat out wrong. He didn't even understand the numbers that he was saying. And people can see, if they're not already deep in the fantasy universe, they can see that this is fantasy. They can see that you just repeating a whole bunch of talking points that you don't understand at all. And yes, that frustrates me, because I've lived my entire life trying to understand things, and when people don't care that they don't understand things and simply want to yell things that make other people not understand things, yes, that annoys me. Biden's economy has been absolutely great. Yes, there was inflation. Yes, inflation went down. The job market is better than it's ever been. Wealth is at all-time highs. Wages are at all-time highs. Like, these are, by any reasonable definition, the economy is doing well. And when you ask people, consumption is up. People are eating more food. People are shopping at stores more. People are buying more stuff. When you ask people how their own economic situation is doing, they say it's great. These things bounced off of Rob because Rob has shield of fantasy. But if you actually try to engage with these numbers, that's what you see. And I think that people who are watching this debate will have seen the vast gulf between someone who's willing to say, yes, Biden messed up on some things, but then here's all the stuff he got right, and on balance, he's good, and someone who reads off a list of AM radio talking points. I think people will be able to see that difference. Anyway, has Biden done everything great in his presidency? No, he's messed up. Show me a president who hasn't. Is the economy good? It's really, really good. Is immigration good? Overall, it is, because most immigration is legal immigration, and the border crisis sucks, and we need to fix it and change that law. But overall, our immigration policy has been fine, because we didn't even talk about legal immigration, which is the bulk of all immigration to America. Anyway, so Biden's done a good job as president, including on manufacturing and the stuff that I was talking about that we didn't even get a chance to talk about. The strengths, including on foreign policy, that we didn't even get a chance to talk about, including on crime, which we did talk about, where I explained why the data that I was citing is the best data, and yes, it's showing that crime is plummeting. And that was never acknowledged. The thing is, if you don't acknowledge the points where your side of the political spectrum, where your side of the debate is actually weak, if you don't, I acknowledge the things that Biden did wrong, right? I acknowledge the mistakes that he made. But if you don't acknowledge the strengths that he has, and if you simply have a list of talking points prepared for each point to say Biden was terrible on this, terrible on this, terrible, and you never once acknowledge, oh yeah, Biden actually did this one thing right, then people can see that it's not credible. People can see that you're not being an honest broker. And that is why, I would still rather be honest and concede that there's things that Biden's done wrong than be dishonest and simply read down a list of talking points. There's my final statement.
Where can people find you if they want to find more of you?
People can find me at the blog No Opinion, NOAHPINION.
Check it out, gang. Both of you, thank you for being here. Gang, you are talkers. I had a whole list of
I had fun,
things
though. I
didn't get to, but I
That's
hope
fine.
you guys enjoyed it. I hope you had fun. I'm going to let these two go. I know they got places to be.